Hi, this is Ann Fitzsimmons at QSM, and I'm going to be showing you the features of the new 8.1 release of the SLIM suite of products. As a summary, at a very high level, there is a new compiler upgrade, and we'll go into the details of what each of these will provide in just a minute. Also, we have added the 2013 trends. There's new functionality as well as all new trend data. And we've also done a bit of background work to sync up the desktop tools with web services. This is really getting ready for the ability to move seamlessly between web services and the desktop with a project, and we'll talk about what we have done within the desktop to get this ready. A bit more detail here. I mentioned that we have moved the entire desktop suite to a new compiler. What this gives the user primarily, there's a new installation that should be more seamless. The applications are now all UAC aware, and what that means for you is that your files will now reside in your My Documents folder, in keeping with the Microsoft Windows UAC security standard, as opposed to being in the Programs folder along with the tools. There is greater compatibility now with Windows 8 and the entire Office 2010 and 2013 suite. As far as the 2013 trends go, I mentioned that there is new trend data. There have been many new projects and systems that we've gotten access to that have been added to the QSM database and analyzed. And all of our default and sample workbooks point to these now. In addition to the new data, there's a new structure, and this includes versioning information about the trends, which is necessary for web services. One of the reasons that it is necessary for web services is that web services works on a common database of projects, and therefore you may have projects that, an older project that you may want to use a 2010 trend, and a newer project you may want to use the 2013 version of that trend. So we need to have access to multiple versions of trend groups so that it is as seamless as possible for the user to use. Another thing that we've added to the trends is we have added some phase tuning metrics. And this is very interesting because we've not only added the metrics and the generation of these metrics, but we are using these in some new solution methods in Estimate. And I'll be walking you through an example of that too. There are a couple of new solution methods based on the trends. One is a new wizard, which will pick a solution directly off your trend. And then the default solution method on the assumption screen is also a trend-based with some slight differences than the wizard. I also mentioned that we are doing some sort of behind-the-scenes work to prepare the desktop for round trip between web services. and the desktop. Some of the things that we needed to do here was to synchronize the algorithms between the two. We have revamped the model somewhat so that it stores effort in hours as opposed to man-months. And this makes things easier to handle the different working environments where one organization may work fewer hours in a man-month than another. The trend-based solution, which I mentioned up here, is similar and matches up with the balanced risk solution in web services. We've also added a design to an average life cycle staffing parameter. The sizing by history algorithms have also been updated to give a more representative view of the entire range of the sizes in the data. And as we talked about before, there are some phase tuning information that we've added, and also some simplification of some of those algorithms. In SLIM Control, we have added a couple of enhancements to the Rational Team Concert integration. Specifically, the custom metrics now work with the subcategories, and also it is possible to, we've added a command line switch that allows the user to specify his .ini file from a location different than what he might have in the QSM tools folder. So that's a summary of the changes. What I'd like to do now is to show you, I'm going to start with the Data Manager application because that's where we start with gathering the new phase tuning metrics, and a couple of the other changes I'll show you there. And then we'll move to SLIM Metrics, where we generate new trends with some of the new trend capability. And then I'll show you SLIM Estimate, where we use this new information in generating a solution. And I'll also show you a couple of the other new features there as well. So let's start up Data Manager. And we'll open a file that I have prepared. This was a file of some Agile type projects, and I use this primarily because they are not as typical of the life cycle. The phase 2 tends to be almost as long as phase 3, with a significant overlap with phase 3, at least in the projects that we had access to here. And so I can show you how it is useful to get this information into your trends so that it can be used when you're estimating projects. So notice here that I've added to the project list view a couple of new metrics. One is phase 2 time tuning, which simply means the ratio of duration of phase 2 duration to phase 3 duration. The same thing for phase 2 effort. It's the ratio of phase 2 to phase 3. And the overlap between phase 2 and phase 3. let's go on into a project so I can show you a couple of the changes here. One of the changes that I did not mention earlier is that we have removed the cost column from the phase information. And the reason that this was done is that we really had two ways in the past to get at cost. One was we always ask for a labor rate, and because effort is entered, it could be calculated, but the user could also enter it as well. But what was happening was we were getting some conflicting information, and we felt that it would be better as well as easier on the user to simply use his labor rate information and calculate that. So you can still get at your cost, you just do not have to enter it now. You'll also notice that the accounting screen has changed a little bit. We still ask you for the person hours per month. It is still a very important input, but we've given more guidance on inputting this. And the reason that we are doing this is that QSM algorithms are standardized to a typical 40-hour U.S. work week. And that includes holidays, lunch breaks, and what have you. But if your development environment is substantially different from this, to the point where you feel that it impacts your productivity, and you want that factored into your calculations, then this value can be changed, and your PI and your projections will reflect that. We do recommend that you use 173 unless you have a really strong reason not to. As before, you can still choose any effort unit to display and input your information. And then finally, labor rate has been simplified somewhat in that we do not ask you for the unit. Before, you could input this in man years, man months, and what have you. The problem was that users found it somewhat confusing, and it was difficult to compare because in making conversions, we had to use the person hours per month value in converting this. So this keeps everybody on the same playing field. And so without any further ado, we'll close out Data Manager, and we're going to be using this data in this file as we look at SLIM metrics. So let's close that out and start up metrics. Okay, I will show you that we are linked to the project, the file that we just looked at with the Agile projects. And because most of the new capability revolves around the trends, we'll go through generating some trend data, and then we'll look at some of the details, and then we will use that trend data in an estimate run. So let's go to Reference Data, Create All Trends. Now I could create a brand new group, but I happen to have already done this before, so we will simply select the Agile Trends with Tuning Factors. It's a group that I set up earlier. And just in case it had some trend data from earlier, I'm going to keep the option to purge any existing trend data. And so once I click on OK, this is going to create all trends. Now, this is not all trends that are possible, but it is a good default set of trends that now includes the phase tuning factors. So we'll click OK, and we get the message that it has been updated with 37 trend records. And so let's go look at the data. So we go to Reference Data, Review Trend Data, and over here is a list of all of your groups, trend groups. So let's select this group. And before we look at the data, there's one other thing I'd like to show you. I'm going to click on Edit, and there is some new information here that is optional. And the new information allows you to specify a version. Typically, we will specify ours with years and maybe a description. Someone else may have a different scheme that they like to use. But if you typically don't generate trends more often than once a year, then using the year is a good way to identify your trends. This information at this point is only used in web services, so it's completely optional. The version name will default to the year that you're running this. We'll cancel out of here. Now let's go and look at, we're going to look at the single metric information because I wanted to look at the phase 2 time tuning percentage and the phase 2 effort tuning percentage. And you can see here, it just so happens that we use the median value when in some of the algorithms, so that's the value that we'll look at here. But the time tuning was 93% and the effort tuning was 28%. Also, the overlap was almost 80%. Now, you'll notice here that we don't have phase 1 and we don't have phase 4 tuning factors, and that was because that particular database did not have phase 1 and phase 4 data, and that's okay. We generate what we can, and if the data is not there, we simply revert to our own internal algorithms in that case. So let's close out this. And there's one more thing in metrics that I'd like to show you. One is there are some additional views that show you the phase tuning factors. This one shows you histograms of the average time tuning by phase. As I mentioned, phase 1 and phase 4 did not have any data, so it is not here. So let's close metrics out and move on over to estimate. What we're going to do here is because one of the new features is in a wizard, I'm going to start up by creating a new estimate using that wizard based on the data that we have just generated. So let's do a file new. Now, prior to this, I have set up a template that uses that trend. But if you have not done that step, then you can always come in here and add that trend line data, and it would be a few more steps for you the very first time in. But we've got it all set up. So we're using a template that has the trend already in it. And I am selecting the solution method, solve from trends. And we'll press OK. And we get the wizard. Click Next. I'll add a name for our project. By default, it's got phase 2 and 3 because that's what's in my template, and we'll stick with that. And we'll add a start date. This screen allows you to choose a different trend, but because we had our template set up properly, it happens to be pointing to this new trend, and so we're fine with that. We'll click Next. The only other piece of information that is needed is a size, and either you will have an estimate for your size, or you can use this. This is a sizing by history or a ballpark sizing type of technique. And basically what it does is it looks at the range of sizes in the trend that you're using. And you can look and see what that range of sizes is. For the Agile projects, they ranged from a very small of 6,800 to a very large of a little over 300,000. So, and we have divided up that size range based on the statistics in the data into these bin sizes. And so we will go ahead and select a medium-sized system. Now, if you had a different trend line, let's say you had some huge system software. Your size range may be from 100,000 to 2 million. So what you select is very, very much tied to the data that's in the trend that you choose. So we're choosing medium. This is the size. We'll click Next, and we're all done. And you can see here that the solution selects a phase 3 duration and a phase 3 effort directly on the trend line for the size that you specified. The other thing, excuse me, that is new is it also used the phase tuning factors from this trend to set up the phase tuning for your project. And you can see here, it's got a long phase 2. Remember, that was about 93%. A fairly low effort in comparison to phase 3, and an enormous overlap. Let's go to phase tuning and just see what it indeed had. So it reset our ratio. It overrode the automatic and reset our ratio to the 93 and 28%. And for the overlap with phase 3, it was almost 80%. So this allows you, if you've got good historical data, this allows you to get a good ballpark estimate right off of your trends with phase tuning specific information as well. Let's go to the basic assumptions page again. And you will notice here that there is an additional solution method called trend-based. This has replaced the old QSM default, that method used an average MBI, but it also was not as is not as fine-tuned to the selected trend data. And we feel that this solution method gives you a more accurate picture of that. It also does not rely on your having to know the PI, because it's selecting a phase 3 time and effort will be calculating the PI for this particular solution. All the other solution methods, you must know that. One of the differences between this particular method and the wizard method that we just looked at is that you can override the phase tuning with this. And as a matter of fact, it does use what is in the phase tuning dialogues. So it just so happens that what is in here now came from the trends, but we can, let's say we'll reset that to 60 and 40 and run it again. We still get phase 3 time and effort directly on the trends, but we get a more traditional looking phase 2. Well, the overlap is still pretty heavy, but the ratios of time and effort are a little bit more traditional. One of the other new features, well, let's see, before I go there, let's go back to the solution assumptions, and we'll click on the accounting tab. This screen looks very much like the one we showed you in Data Manager. It's the very same input with guidance on this input. The labor rate, if you'll remember, is now always in hours. And so let's just close that out. And we will go now to look at your project environment. And there is a new functionality on this screen. Because we are using trends, and we're hoping that users will take the time to get their history data so that they are using them when they've got sufficient data. We wanted to make it easier for the user to know when he's got a valid set of trends. So we've added this button to validate your selected trend group. If you're using a mix, it'll validate the mix. If you're using a single trend group, it will validate that group. So let's click on that, and you'll get a message that either that trend group has sufficient data to use the various algorithms or it does not. So we'll close that out. And we'll close that out. And that pretty much concludes this show and tell of the releases, the release features in 8.1. And I thank you very much.